The wind rolled across the Wyoming plains like a wandering ghost, brushing through the tall golden grass around young widow Clara Holden's lonely homestead, a place built with hope by a husband she lost far too soon and now protected only by her stubbornness and the child growing beneath her heart. She woke that morning with the familiar ache of grief pressing against her ribs, but as she stepped outside, balancing a tin pail at her hip, she saw something she never expected. A man, blood-soaked and barely breathing, collapsed beside the weather-worn cabin wall as if he had dragged himself from death's doorway to her doorstep. Clara froze, her breath catching, every instinct screaming danger. Yet something about the way his hand weakly reached toward her made her rush to him despite the tremor in her chest. His face was bruised purple, a harsh gash along his cheekbone, and his shirt was torn open above a deep wound. But beneath the dirt and blood she sensed refinement. His boots were expensive. His belt hand-tooled, his voice, when he finally rasped out a word, carried a softness she did not expect from a man who looked like he had ridden through hell. "Water," he managed, and without thinking, Clara dropped to her knees, her belly brushing the dirt as she lifted his head and pressed a tin cup to his cracked lips. As he drank with trembling desperation, she noticed how his eyes, storm blue and full of some guarded sorrow, kept drifting to her rounded stomach with something like respect, maybe even guilt, before rolling shut again. Clara whispered steady reassurances she barely believed herself, dragging his weight inside the cabin inch by inch, the whole time fighting the fear that whoever had done this to him might come looking. She cleaned his wounds with what little she had, stitching torn flesh with shaking hands, praying silently both for him and for strength she was not sure she possessed. Outside, thunder rumbled low across the plains, the kind that promised trouble, and as the stranger drifted into a fevered sleep, he murmured fragments of words that made no sense. Brother, betrayal, ranches, all of Wyoming, as if he carried secrets too heavy for a dying man. Clara sat beside him through the long hours, wiping sweat from his brow, trying not to stare at the strength hidden beneath the bruises, or the quiet vulnerability that made him seem far more human than dangerous. She didn't know his name, didn't know why he'd come, didn't know whether he'd live to see another sunrise. But as her baby kicked gently beneath her ribs, as if reminding her she was not as alone as she felt, Clara understood something she could not yet explain. This broken stranger was going to change everything, and if her viewers are still reading, still feeling the emotion rising in this frontier tale, then make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what's coming next is bigger, wilder, and more life-changing than Clara Holden or anyone could possibly imagine. The storm had passed by morning, but the air was thick with the smell of wet earth and distant trouble. When Clara stepped back into the cabin, carrying a bowl of water warmed over the fire, the stranger, Silas, lay where she had left him, though now his eyes were half open, tracking her every movement, with the quiet awareness of a man used to studying danger before speaking to it. When she knelt beside him, he swallowed hard, almost embarrassed by the way he needed her hands to lift him, needed her help to drink, needed the comfort of someone he had never meant to meet. Clara expected fear to rise inside her again, but instead she felt something steadier, something grounding. This man, dangerous by reputation, powerful by name, was now just a wounded human being fighting for breath. "You should have left me outside," he murmured, voice rough from pain and sleeplessness. Clara shook her head firmly, brushing mud and dried blood from his cheek. "A man doesn't crawl to my doorstep for no reason," she said, "and I wasn't raised to let someone die alone." For a moment Silas looked away, almost ashamed, and Clara saw a different kind of hurt there. Older, deeper, untouched by the wounds on his body. Finally he spoke, and the words carried the weight of a confession he had held too long. "I didn't come here by chance." She froze, hands still, breath caught. Silas continued, voice a low rumble, explaining that he had known her husband, had valued him, had relied on him more than most of the foremen he employed across his enormous ranching empire. Her husband, he said softly, had once saved Silas from making a foolish decision that would have cost hundreds of families their livelihoods, and before Silas could repay the kindness, her husband had been taken by fever, leaving Clara alone with land no one else wanted and a cabin built with more love than lumber. Clara's throat tightened as grief, memory, and disbelief twisted together. He never told me he worked directly for you, she whispered. Silas gave her a faint smile. Your husband was humble. Too humble to speak of what he deserved credit for. He paused, breath catching as a wave of pain rolled through his side. Before he died, he asked me to check on you, to make sure you didn't lose this place to anyone with power or bad intentions. Clara stared, stunned. No one had ever told her this. No one had ever come. And now the very man her husband had trusted most was bleeding on her table. As she absorbed his words, something else flickered in Silas's eyes, regret, guilt, maybe even shame. I didn't come sooner because my world doesn't allow softness, he admitted. And now my brother wants that world for himself. He wants everything. He explained the ambush in detail, how he had ridden to a meeting under the pretense of signing over a lesser ranch, only to realize too late that the men surrounding him bore the same brand, his brothers. They shot him, left him in a ravine, and assumed wolves or the cold night would finish the job. But I started crawling, Silas whispered. Not toward my ranch, not toward my men, but toward you. Clara felt her breath hitch. Why me? His answer was simple and devastating. Because your husband believed you were the bravest woman he'd ever met. Emotion surged in her chest so abruptly that she had to turn away. Her husband's memory had felt so distant for so long, but now here it was, alive in the voice of a man she should have feared but somehow didn't. Before she could gather her thoughts, Silas touched her wrist, his fingers trembling but intent. Clara, he said softly, I need you to understand something. I didn't just crawl here to survive. I crawled here because if my brother seizes my ranches, he will come after every landholder, every widow, every small family who stands in his way. He will not leave you in peace. I am not the danger you should fear. He is. The cabin fell quiet, the only sound the crackle of fire and Clara's heartbeat pounding in her ears. She looked down at her belly, the gentle swell that reminded her every day of the future she was fighting for, and something inside her hardened into steel. Then you need to live, she said, her voice steady. Because I won't let anyone take what's left of my family. Silas stared at her, something like admiration shining through the pain, something he hadn't felt in years, trust. He tried to speak, but the words faded as exhaustion claimed him again. Clara covered him with a blanket, smoothed the hair from his forehead, and whispered the same promise her husband once whispered to her on nights when fear stalked the plains. We survived by morning. Outside, the sky darkened again, clouds gathering in a heavy, bruised blue, and far across the valley, a distant line of riders appeared, moving slow, searching, hunting. Clara's pulse quickened, but she didn't step back or tremble. She reached for the rifle above the hearth, loaded it with steady hands, and stood guard at the window as Silas drifted deeper into sleep. She was no longer just a widow, no longer just a frightened woman in a lonely cabin. She was a mother, a protector, a frontier soul with fire in her spine, and no man, not even a powerful cattle baron's brother, would take her home without a fight. And to all the listeners who want more of this story, more strength, more danger, more Western fire, don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter, because Clara and Silas's battle has only just begun.